Interesting because if I were talking to, let's say, the American Army anywhere in World War II or the British Army, the notion of taking prisoners doesn't seem like such a big deal. In the Battle of the Bulge, it wouldn't seem so important, but it seems like around the Senyo, maybe because the battle was so small, taking prisoners was almost a symbolic way of...
It was a symbolic. It was a great symbol. It was a great symbol. This is why I imagine everybody talks about this incident. You see, when you are in the front line, when you eventually arrive at the front line, you don't see the enemy. You shoot at posts, at positions, but you rarely see the enemy. You see the enemy only when there is a clash, when there is, a frontal attack. So even when we were at the front line, we still didn't have that feeling that we are now fighting the Germans, that we are winning, that we are doing it. And I can still remember that early, I think it was an April day, early April day in the morning, around 10 o'clock or so. And the patrol went out. It was just a patrol. And I was a medic. So I stayed a bit behind in a post. We had, only a firing, how do you call it, where you, I forget the word now. It's where you put the gun and you look through it, kind of a slit, how do you call it. And as I stand there, and I looked in the direction of where this platoon went out, all of a sudden I see a German soldier running, and another German soldier, and another German, and I have the feeling that the Germans are now attacking us. And I am all, cold, and there is a Tommy gun there, and I take this Tommy gun, and I prepare myself, for the final, fight, and then I realize that they are prisoners. And I go out, and there are these 14 prisoners that we took. We finally took German prisoners. They behaved like prisoners. One of them started to say, "Ich bin ein Sozialdemokrat. Mein Vater war ein Sozialdemokrat. I am a social democrat. My father was..." And some of us spoke Yiddish, broken Yiddish, so they spoke to them in Yiddish. And it became such a wonderful situation. So you can't compare the soldiers from Palestine trying to do all those big things and actually, really taking Germans into prison and seeing them, as frightened bastards was a wonderful feeling.
And later then, as you moved north...
True.
I can see in your joy there was a major moment.
That's right. But I'll tell you something again, which I'm also, I repeat the story and I'm very proud of it. We had a young officer who was from England, a Jewish officer. They volunteered, they joined the brigade. His name was Van Gelder. I still remember his name. He was killed sometime later on in a different battle. We called him Mickey Rooney because he looked like Mickey Rooney. And when we took those prisoners, and some of us wanted, to kill them immediately, because here comes revenge. And Mickey Rooney took his gun and said, "If any of you touches a prisoner, I'm going to shoot him dead right now. We are Jewish soldiers, we are not Nazis." And this was, again, something much, much bigger than the event itself. It was a double symbol, a double metaphor. And indeed, we didn't touch them, and I remember we carried them to do the Echelon, I don't remember how it was called, and there they were taken by our MPs.
When you then saw the German prisoners of war coming down, and you said you threw stones at them, and I read in your book, and
yes,
you beat them. And,
yes.
whether or not did revenge yourself or believed in it, the passion that all of you guys brought to the battle and the frustration that your battle was short, and your knowledge that just over the next hill in
Yes.
Poland and Czechoslovakia and Germany, Austria, were family members or no family members.
Right.
What was the gut sense of people about what to do with all these feelings of, I assume, rage and sadness combined?
There was rage and frustration. And again, you see, I must also come back to the fact that we were young men. We were young men. And we were alive. And you can't just, all day long have rage and this. We were living our lives. What we needed, what everybody needs in a situation like this, is a purpose, is a clear purpose. The minute all those feelings of both impotence and rage and frustration were directed into this purpose of the Jews who were coming, things changed all of a sudden. And we were happy to do it. There were small things, but you see, we were told to give up some of our blankets, some of the bread, we took the chocolate, everything, and everybody felt so wonderful, that they could do those little things. Or the chauffeurs, the drivers, who were driving 400 or 500 miles, in the direction of Munich and Poland and Czechoslovakia, and creating that, as I said earlier, that freedom train. But beyond that, we were also young men who loved to drink and have fun and go to Venice and have girls, and we were human beings.
And yet you must have gotten very old very quickly when you finally got to a place like Klagenfurt. Describe again.
Well, to me, again, it's a personal thing. I speak only for really as one individual. As I told you earlier about Klagenfurt after 50 years, you see, when I, Hanoch, a young boy of 18, with a few friends, some of them were new immigrants, some of them had really families there. And we come to a German, it was called Austria, but to me there wasn't and isn't any difference. They were the same Nazis, and they willingly cooperated. And we come to a railway station. All the insignia, the Nazi insignia, are still there. The manager of the station has torn this, but you can see, it's still the shade, the faded part, you can see. And we now are going to revenge. We are now going to do the big thing. But what do you do? What do you do? We can throw him out of his office. We did it. We threw him out of his office, and we took over the place. We put our things. We ordered him around. Then we went out to town to see what can we do. And we could do nothing. What could we do? We couldn't just, walk the street and shoot. What we could do is to look for Jews. This is the only thing we could really do. And that woman whom I mentioned earlier, this young nurse, who for some sixth sense, the Jewish sense, told us that she must be a Jewish girl. The way she stands, the way she looks, the way she stopped.
Start the story over, because I won't be able to use it the way you just started it, but describe it like it happened. You were in Klagenfurt.
We were walking, along a main road, a main street, and talking among ourselves. What can we do? How can we try and find Jews? And we arrived at a kind of a huge square with cobblestone, paved with cobblestone. And I still can see a gate there of some medieval, probably something. And there, at the edge of this square, stood a young woman, and I can still see her, dressed like in Marlene Dietrich style, a beret, a raincoat. And she could have been anybody, but we had the sense that she was Jewish, and we went over to her. And we started talking. She spoke German, and somebody started to talk to her German and told her, "You see, we are from the Jewish Brigade. We are from Palestine. Who are you?" And then she said, whisperingly, that she is a Jewish girl with Aryan papers, working at the hospital here. And we told her, "Why are you whispering? The war is over. It's finished." She said, "Yes, yes, but she's still," and she was very agitated, and again, but still frightened. And we asked her, "Do you know of any more Jews here?" And she said, "Well, I know of a group of Hungarian Jews. I think they are tailors. And if you walk back along the street you came from," so we told her, "Why don't you come with us?" So she said, "I'll come with you, but
Let's go back. I'm sorry, I hate to do this because I know you're seeing it. The airplane.
And we are asking her, "Are there any more Jews here?" And she says, "Well, there is a group of Hungarian, I think that they are tailors, and they stay in a house right on the street that you came from." And we ask her, "Could you show us?" And she reluctantly, she says, "Okay, I'll walk with you." And she walks with us, and there is a house that the upper part of it, I can still see it, as if it were yesterday. The upper part of it is destroyed, and there are scaffoldings around it. And she says, "Now you go from the side, there is an entrance to a cellar. I won't go in with you." We say, "Why?" She said, "I won't, thank you." And she disappeared. She was afraid. She was still afraid. A month after the war was over, she was still afraid. And we entered, and I don't know if we remember that it was the Sabbath or no. I'm not so sure. But as we entered this cellar, we realized that it was the Sabbath before sunset. And this group of Jews were sitting around a makeshift table and celebrating, as they call this, the departure of the Sabbath. There is a kind, they call it the third meal, singing and having some drink. And we enter, a group of young men from Israel, and we say, "Shabbat Shalom. We are soldiers from Palestine, Jewish soldiers." And they look at us. They don't know what we talk about. They are suspicious because we are in uniform. We are British soldiers, and they had enough with uniforms. But after we repeat it once and twice, they suddenly realize who we are. And they have, and we have, a kind of again, I must say, of a religious experience. They jump at us as if we really were the Messiah. And when we explain to them that we are on the border, there's the brigade, so they say, "Okay, we are coming." And we say to them, "No, you can't come. We are in the British Army. You stay here a few more days and we'll see to it that they don't let us go." And I do remember that moment, that in order to somehow make them believe in us, I tear off my sleeve the badge, of the brigade, which was a yellow star with a background, a white blue background. And the man takes it as if, it was a talisman. This is the moment that I, for one, knew that I am part of something very great.
And it sounds like that in some ways that story is really a metaphor for everything, for the most important part of what the brigade
The
did.
big thing is that it is a metaphor and it's simple fact at the same time. There is no literary, flowering of this. This is how it was. And this is why this metaphor has, for me, this kind of mystical, religious element in it. Nothing invented.
Now that's a tiny little accidental moment. A scared Jewish young woman on the street, the Sabbath,
Yes.
Hungarian Jews. Um, and yet you are also playing this story out on a very large world stage in terms of the survival of the Jewish people and the end of World War II, etc. How important do you think was the brigade's involvement in the Riha, in getting people to the camps and getting them trained and getting them moved south, compared to other Jews who were also active, whether it was the Joint or whether it was members of the Mossad or the Haganah operating independent of you? I never quite understood whether how much credit the brigade gets and how much credit everyone should get for this movement.
I think that when you speak about the brigade's role, at this juncture, we speak now about the summer of 45 to sometime the second part of 46, that first year. Now, that first year was crucial because all those organizations that you've mentioned were not there yet. The organized Jewish involvement took time to materialize. The presence of the brigade, on the other hand, was not only important. It was, to go back to what we said earlier, this was the great metaphor of hope. The brigade as such was the metaphor. The 1,000 trucks with the Magen David on them, with the Star of David on them. The soldiers who were masters of the situation, their ability to provide food, clothing, shelter, transportation. This turned those devastated, ruined survivors all of a sudden into members of this strong new force. And this was a tremendous change. That if, let's say, and there were many cases like this, that one of the survivors, it doesn't just meet the brigade. He meets his brother, he meets his cousin, he meets his uncle. And all of a sudden, he is again part of a different Jewish situation, of a future. In this sense, the brigade kindled the imagination of survivors, and they came running towards it from all over. Later on, of course, it became of lesser and lesser significance as the other things developed. But at the initial stage, it is my strong view that had not the brigade been there, and the other 10,000 soldiers from Palestine in Palestinian units all over Italy, modern Jewish history would have looked different. The post-war history, I mean. And I don't know if the state of Israel would have been founded, because it was only the concerted pressure of both those immigrants who now realize that there is a Palestine to go. There's these young Israelis, these handsome young Israelis will protect us, they want us. And the effort in Palestine to get independence made it. So this is, when you speak about the brigade and the 10,000 other volunteers for Palestine in Italy, it was not just important, it was crucial.
And what you said about Klagenfurt and this one particular story was clearly replicated all over Europe by individual brigade members.
Endless stories, endless stories. I could tell you, it's not of my own experience, but I could tell you endless stories. You see, when you, Israel today, 51 years later, we have a friend, a retired Supreme Court judge, Judge Beisky. He's a friend, a good friend. Now he was there, one of the survivors. There are generals. There is another, the man who is now a president of the Supreme Court, Barak. He is a child survivor from the Kovna ghetto. So it's not just, you know, an anecdote. It's an existential situation.
But how did you make it all happen? You were in the British Army. You were stationed in Tarvisio for quite a while. I assume you had to show up in the morning and salute and go to bed in your bed at night. How did each of you?
Well,
what was the motivation to
well,
go
I
out?
gave you. I think. Well, I'll give you an example. First of all, very soon, not me. I was a very small peg, you know, and I don't want to take credit for things I had no part in. But we cooperated in a small way. But the people who were, you know, the real leaders, very soon, the whole machine was geared to cheat everybody in order to save Jews, by hook or by crook. For instance, just to give you one instance in which I was involved, we were guarding a German electricity depot in Pontebba. It's the same area on the Italian frontier. They dug into the Alps, you know, a huge electrical depot. Now, we were there for 3 weeks or so. After 3 weeks, there was an inspection by some British high officials. There was nothing left there. It was all stolen, sold, and used to organize the bricha. And they say, how could it be? We said, we don't know. That's what we found. There was nothing here. Now, in order for cars to drive, there was a whole system of forged movement orders. And there was, in fact, an agreed code. It was called TTG. Now, TTG was, in fact, the initials of a dirty word in both Arabic and Yiddish. It meant nothing. I don't want to repeat it, but those who know. And all documents were sound TTG. This is destination TTG. All gas depots were used, you know, liberally for this. It was a huge organization done for the noblest purpose imaginable. And I think that we are very proud to have been part of this illegal operation.
Who told you to do it, or did it come from your hearts?
It's something that really I cannot pinpoint. I remember things, you see. For instance, in our battalion, there was a quartermaster, yes? So the quartermaster decided that today, instead of getting so much bread, we get half. Instead of getting chocolate, we don't get chocolate at all. And so on and so forth. And everybody understood, and everybody, you know, was just very willing. So it was a passive role, but it was a passive role which I think made every one of us feel that he's part of it.
But it wasn't something that came from a Ben Gurion or a Sharet? Or
well, I think that they came into the picture rather later. At the beginning, it was a spontaneous thing started with the troops. They started it. And all the other stories are late inventions.
Why do you think the brigade has received so little note in history, other than by...
There's only 5 minutes left on this too.
10 minutes?
5.
Okay, we'll talk about Why?
I think that
You guys okay?
I think that there are a number of reasons. There are, you know, secondary reasons, and there are a major, I think, explanation. I think the major explanation is that the brigade was not an organization that had a strong self-image. It was organized for a purpose, for the war. And when it was disbanded in 46, it was disbanded in 46, and people came back. Everyone went his own way. There was not this organization, you know, that was conscious of its place in history and started to write the history. No. And what's more, you have to remember that very soon after our return from the war, there was another war. You have to remember that, let's say I was discharged in July 46. In the 1st of December 47, I was already again a soldier in the Israeli army. And many of the brigade members were killed and so on. And there was another story, a bigger story, a thing that caught the imagination, and people had no time to think about what was just 2 or 3 years earlier. And by the time the brigade started to think about its history, it was a bit too late. This is my explanation.
So history really, as you say, swamped you with,
Right.
dumped the boat with a bigger,
With a
war
much
that
bigger,
was more important.
story.
But what was the importance of the brigade members to the fighting and winning of that war?
Well, I think it was of really, again, a great importance by the very fact that here came, not only the brigade, but the British came back from the British Army. Here there were thousands of young men who had been trained in a real army to use real modern equipment, to use guns, to use machines, to use airplanes, to use mortars, to use everything. Many of them were junior commanders and had experience in command. Some of them were captains, majors, and a few of them were even more. While the Israeli Haganah forces had no experience at all in combat of larger formations. And already in 48, you know, it's a known story that in 48 there was already the first, how shall I say, confrontation between the Palmach and the brigade, while Ben Gurion took the side of the brigade. He needed the experience. This is why Shlomo Shamir became a commander of the 7th Brigade, and Chaim Laskov became commander, and Remez became commander of the Air Force, and so on, and Zaro became my battalion commander. All those people who came from the British Army had brought with them larger know-how and some experience in real warfare. So it played, I think, a very important role in not only in the war, but in the organization of the Israeli army.
Maybe I need to change the